Good evening. The likely success of Brexit talks between the government and Labour has been called into question after the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell accused the Prime Minister of breaching the confidentiality of the negotiations. He said he didn't trust her after several newspapers reported that the two sides were close to a deal. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered the military to continue with massive strikes on the Gaza Strip in response to hundreds of rockets fired by Palestinian militants. The Sultan of Brunei has responded to international condemnation by deciding that new laws banning gay sex will not carry the death penalty. The Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell has accused the Prime Minister of jeopardising attempts by senior Conservative and Labour figures to reach an agreement on Brexit. Mr McDonnell said Theresa May had broken the confidentiality of the talks after several newspapers reported she was preparing to give ground in discussions this week. Mrs May issued a plea to Labour in the Mail on Sunday, saying, "Let's do a deal." Downing Street said it was not responsible for claims that an agreement could be reached within days. More details from our political correspondent, Nick Erdley.
After a thumping for her party in the local elections, Theresa May has said she wants to get on with delivering Brexit. Her message to Jeremy Corbyn in the Mail on Sunday was a simple one. Voters want the Conservatives and Labour to put their differences aside and do a deal. But John McDonnell's comments suggest it is far from certain that will happen in the coming days. This morning, reacting to Mrs May's comments and media reports that an agreement could be imminent, the Shadow Chancellor accused the Prime Minister of acting in bad faith and had this response when asked if he trusted her.
No. Sorry, not after this weekend, when she's blown the confidentiality I had. And I actually think she's jeopardised the negotiations for her own personal protection. We've got to have some guarantees because every leadership candidate now is threatening to rip this deal up.
Reflecting the concerns of many in his party, Mr McDonnell likened the talks to trying to negotiate a contract with a company that's about to go into administration. Moving towards Labour's position of a closer trading relationship would infuriate many Conservatives. This morning, Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 Committee of Tory MPs, warned that accepting Labour's demand for a customs union could lead to a split in the Conservative Party. But the International Development Secretary, Rory Stewart, urged Mrs May's doubters to get behind her.
Yes, there will be short-term pain. Yes, we may have to make the very unpopular decision of getting a Brexit deal done, appreciating that everybody in the country has 100 different views about what type of Brexit they want. Take that pain and then let's move on to talk about things like the environment, which people really care about.
The Tories are also worried about losing further political ground to unambiguously pro-Leave parties. Nigel Farage is leader of the Brexit Party.
I think if they push forward with this, it will be seen as a coalition of politicians against the people, and I think millions of people would give up on both Labour and the Conservatives. I really do.
On the other side of the debate, 100 opposition MPs won against a deal that could be seen as a stitch-up, calling for a confirmatory referendum on any deal. Many of them are from the Labour Party and believe Mr Corbyn should look to Lib Dem and Green gains in the local elections for inspiration. The Plaid Cymru leader, Adam Price, said even if a close relationship with membership of the single market and a customs union was agreed, it should be put back to the people.
That's the problem, I think, that particularly the Labour Party is facing, because on their side, a lot of their supporters are deeply angry at the vacillation and the ambiguity of their leadership.
Talks between ministers and the Labour front bench resume on Tuesday.
Even if senior Conservative and Labour figures reach a Brexit agreement, it's unclear whether they'll be able to secure enough backing from their own MPs to get it through Parliament. One of the most divisive issues is Labour's condition that Britain should remain in a customs union with the EU, an arrangement that would allow the tariff-free movement of goods and services. Many Tories fear that would stifle the UK's ability to make new trade deals. Our political correspondent Chris Mason assesses the difficulties the party leaderships face.
Peer beyond the rhetoric, beyond even the pages of the manifestos upon which the Conservatives and Labour stood at the last general election. What you see in the granular detail are two parties whose official positions, at least, are not that far apart on Brexit. An analysis by the think tank the Institute for Government concludes the two sides are within touching distance, but adds, strikingly, that does not mean they will meet. So the question then is why. On issues such as alignment with the EU on workers' rights and environmental protections, and on maintaining security arrangements, gaps such as there are appear potentially bridgeable. But this is a project underpinned by an attempt to find the numbers necessary to command a majority in the Commons, so persuading backbenchers to swallow any compromises is essential. Too many refusing to do so could mean the numbers still don't add up. And even if the maths works, the politics might not, if either party leader concludes the price of doing a deal is smashing their own party. And there remain two massive points of difference between many Conservative and Labour MPs. For plenty of Tories, a permanent customs union, a key Labour demand, would be a step too far. And for plenty on the opposition benches, any Brexit delivered without another referendum would be unconscionable. So the talks continue. They are detailed and serious. But that is a necessary but not necessarily sufficient condition in eventually striking a deal.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered his armed forces to carry out massive strikes against Palestinian militants in retaliation for a wave of rocket attacks from Gaza. 3 Israelis have died. Officials in Gaza say 12 Palestinians have been killed since Friday, including a Hamas commander. Our Middle East correspondent Tom Bateman reports from Jerusalem.
People in Gaza saw some of the most intensive airstrikes in years as Israel hit more than 200 targets it described as militant sites. Buildings were levelled and a tunnel dug into Israel was destroyed. In Gaza City, people in a packed street looked at the wreckage of a car in flames, the resumption by the Israelis of targeted killings. Israel said its driver had helped transfer funds from Iran to Palestinian militants. More than 500 rockets were fired from Gaza, according to the Israelis. Air raid warnings barely stopped in many parts of southern Israel. Some hit homes and people had 15 seconds to run to shelters. A factory worker was killed in the city of Ashkelon, while an anti-tank missile killed the driver of a car. The casualty rate prompted a promise of a fierce response from the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
This morning I instructed the Israeli Defence Forces to continue with massive strikes against terrorists in the Gaza Strip. And I also instructed that forces around the Gaza Strip be stepped up with tank, artillery and infantry forces.
This has been the deadliest flare-up between Israel and Hamas in Gaza since they fought a war in 2014. The UN and Egypt have been involved in efforts trying to avoid a repeat. But for now, neither side seems ready to back down.
3 teenagers have been badly injured after falling from a cliff in Cornwall. They fell around 70 feet at Park Trammell Cove near Porthleven late last night and were airlifted to hospital in Devon. John Donnison reports.
The Coast Guard said it received a call around midnight from one of the men saying he and 2 others had fallen from a cliff. The man was able to use the torch on his mobile phone to help searchers find them. The 3 men were discovered on the beach below the cliffs in the early hours of this morning. Police believe they fell around 70 feet. 2 of the men are believed to be 19 and the third 18, and all are from the local area. The men were airlifted to Derriford Hospital in Plymouth with multiple serious injuries, which have been described as potentially life-threatening or life-changing. Their families have been notified and police are appealing for witnesses.
The Sultan of Brunei has extended a moratorium on the death penalty to new legislation which prohibits gay sex. The Southeast Asian country sparked an international outcry when it announced that offences including homosexuality, adultery and rape would be punishable by death, including by stoning. Michael Bristow reports.
Under the new rules, same-sex relationships and adultery were defined as crimes. Death by stoning, whipping and amputation were introduced as punishments. There was a worldwide outcry. The UN said these Islamic laws were cruel and inhumane. Celebrities such as George Clooney and Sir Elton John called for a boycott of hotels owned by the country's Muslim ruler, Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah. These include the Dorchester in London. The Sultan now appears to have listened to the criticism. In a televised address, he said a 20-year moratorium on the death penalty in Brunei would be extended to this new legislation, which came into force last month. But he also defended the rules, saying their merit would eventually become evident once misconceptions had been cleared up.
Police forces and